Hi Miles, and welcome to the HMO podcast.
Hi Andy, thank you very much for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I was really excited to get you on, Miles, because I know a lot about you, and I think what you're doing in the property industry right now and how you've used and built your HMO portfolio to go on and do other things is going to be really inspiring for a lot of people. And you're a member of the HMO Mastermind, so we work quite closely together. And one of the things that we have been doing as well is working on your social media presence and building your profile and authority. But it's possible that some of our listeners won't already know you. So for their benefit, Miles, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Miles Pattison-Appleton. I'm 27. I've been investing in HMOs and property for the last sort of 6-7 years. I currently live in London, but I invest in the West Midlands in Herefordshire, as well as a new area that I've been exploring recently in Gloucester and Cheltenham. So that's been one of the reasons that I've joined the HMO Mastermind, was because I was looking at new areas to look at investing in. Otherwise, outside of property, I am a very keen sportsman, so do a lot of running, play a lot of squash, and I do a lot of sort of slightly more unusual sports. I spend a lot of time fishing, I'm also a member of the Army Reserve, so that keeps me fairly busy outside of property.
I bet it certainly does, Miles. And your family is very involved in property. You sort of I think you've inherited that interest certainly from at least your parents, by the sounds of it. And your HMO portfolio is quite substantial, and certainly your family's portfolio of HMOs is quite substantial. What do your businesses currently look like?
Yeah, okay, so there's really three elements to it. The first is my personal HMO portfolio, which is made up of both my own HMOs and joint ventures with HMOs. I've then got a letting agency called Relocation PA that manages not only ours but other landlords' HMOs in Hereford, Worcester, Gloucester and Cheltenham. And then the third sort of core business that I operate in is our development company called March's Homes, and that really focuses on land-led residential property development.
Amazing. And so, it's fair to say that you've got a huge amount of experience in the HMO space. You've got your own portfolio, you've got your family portfolio, and then you've got stuff that you're managing for other people as well. And on top of that, you're developing, so you're a new homes developer. Yeah. And actually, it'd be interesting to talk to you about a bit of that today, because some of those sites are quite chunky as well. So these aren't one or two new builds; these are pretty big sites. So yeah, Miles, you must be incredibly busy. How many HMOs is your agency currently managing then? And I'm assuming that manages your own portfolio as well as your family stuff as well.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So the idea when we set it up was very much if we could get our properties managed for free, then that would be an excellent outcome for it. And obviously the way we've done that is by taking on other landlords' properties that pays for the offices and staff. That also allows us to not have to contribute a huge amount to manage our own properties. So the agency, so Relocation PA, currently manages about 250 rooms for across all those areas, and they're all HMOs. So we only specialise in high-end professional HMOs. So we don't do flats or single-lets or take on sort of the lower end of the HMO market. It's very much high-end, and that's the brand we are still building and trying to sort of build.
So that is a pretty big outfit, 250 HMO rooms. I'm surprised you've got any hair, Miles, because that is a pretty big outfit. Okay, and how far does this all go back? Were your parents investing in HMOs before you yourself started investing, or did you do it and you got them into it? How did it all work?
No, so they very much started before I was involved or interested. And they started with a portfolio of single lets. So bought a load of single-lets, and then naturally progressed up from single-lets into acquiring a few HMOs. The whole portfolio was in Telford at the time, so single-lets from Telford, and they had about 4 or 5 HMOs in Telford. And then we live in Hereford, or just outside Hereford, and so the natural opportunity was to explore the idea of HMOs in Hereford, which is a slightly unusual place, given that there is a few big draws there, but it's not your typical sort of big city where you expect young professionals to want to move to. But I think that's the wonderful thing about HMOs is pretty much any city in the whole of the UK, within reason, has the ability and the opportunity to have HMOs there, and people are always looking for HMOs there. You'd be amazed how many people you just think wouldn't want to rent in these areas, but they are and need to. So they started buying in Hereford. And then really that's when I just started university, and I was studying at Oxford Brookes to do real estate. So that's sort of on the path to sort of being a chartered surveyor, going and working for a big company as a surveyor. And I sort of started getting interested as they started buying a bit more locally, and I'd come back from my holidays, and there was refurbs going on, and there were this and that, and it was pretty interesting. And obviously, as a slightly poor student, I was quite interested in, I remember setting out a goal: if I could just make £500, so my parents were paying my allowance at the time. I was like, I don't have to have an allowance for them, and if I could get another £500, I could have a car and stuff like that. So I remember that was sort of the, whilst at uni, my first year, I was like, really, that would be the dream, and I thought that was awesome, just to have a couple of properties kicking out £500. And so that was really where it started from.
Well, it sounds like you've well surpassed that now, Miles. That's for sure. And I agree, by the way. I think there is pretty much an opportunity to create HMOs and run HMOs successfully almost anywhere in the country. I think it's just about understanding that market, understanding the local population, and just getting the value for money point right. But it does work almost anywhere. I've seen HMOs up in the Highlands, and I've seen them down in rural Cornwall and everywhere in between as well. So it's great to hear someone say that as well, because I think we often do fixate, and certainly I'm guilty of talking about HMOs and prime HMOs being centrally located in the big cities, and it certainly does make your life a little bit easier when you've got a big pool to fish from, but they can certainly work anywhere. So you went to university, Miles, and actually you're a surveyor, aren't you?
I never qualified, so yeah.
We've caught him out there, audience.
So So when you do these exams at university, you basically get your you basically get your sort of like first level of your sort of ICS exams, which leads you to go on to do your APC. And until you've done your APC, you're not qualified. I left uni with those sort of RICS exams, but never did the APC because I went straight into full-time property.
And was that a very active choice, Miles? Because you're a really intelligent guy, so no doubt you could have just continued and done that. Was it just that you weren't enjoying it, or was it very clear that actually you were going to go down your own path and build your own property business?
I went through phases at uni. At one point, I was convinced I wanted to be a surveyor. I was doing loads of work experience, and I was loving it. It was great, sort of thing. And then the next minute, I was definitely not wanting to do it. And I remember having this big sort of debate, really, that I was sort of, do I start applying for graduate jobs or do I just take the plunge? At this point, I was sort of already quite invested in the idea of HMOs. Hadn't yet got one, but I just thought actually I would take the plunge and just focus on building a portfolio opposed to getting a job.
So how did it all kind of pan out there, Miles? How did you come out of university and get started with that first one? Because I think that's a question that a lot of people always want to know the answer to. And in my experience, that's always the most difficult bit, is just making that transition from either working into property or something else, and just getting hold of that first one. How did you make it all happen?
So a bit of trial and error. So in my end of my first year at uni, I was like, right, how are we going to do this? So I started, reading all the books I could, and trying to get a bit more of an understanding about it. Obviously, I had the fortunate position of having my parents had a load I could piggyback off in terms of learning a bit about it, compliance, all that side of things. I could physically see and touch up and running HMOs. I was also incredibly lucky I could piggyback those for sort of case studies and track record, which was super helpful. But to start with, I actually started off by working for free for a property investor in Oxford called Jackie Edwards, and she does a lot of rent to rent. And I met her at a PIN meeting in Oxford, and I just thought, great, this is it. She was sort of up and coming and really sort of trying to sort of do some quite big things in the rent to rent sort of space at the time. And I thought, great, well, I offered to work for her for free. And so I spent about 9 months working for her, just getting an idea of their business in Oxford and, really understanding how HMOs operated in and around, the professional sort of Oxford HMOs. And then from that, I decided, okay, great, rent to rent would be an option to try. So obviously it's 19, didn't have any money. I thought, okay, right, rent to rent would be a really good way into it. I think as most people do, get some cash flow, get some experience. So I started looking at Banbury for rent to rents and spent about another 6 or 9 months looking there. And it just, a few sort of false starts there, and it didn't really come to anything. And so what I decided in the end was actually it would be probably just as easy to raise actual investment from somebody else, and I therefore managed to use the track record of my parents' portfolios and a bit of sort of I've got a track record, and I managed to raise some external finance and ended up buying my first one outside of which was actually in Hereford when I was in my second year at uni.
Brilliant. So you actually really went out of your way to learn as much as you could about the industry, I think, which will surprise a lot of people. And did you learn a lot during that period, Miles? Was that a really good footing that kind of helped catalyse your journey into building your own portfolio and business?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was invaluable. Mainly, I would say, through just probably more of the determination and encouragement to do it than actual, it was a bit dull waiting for maintenance men to come, or whatever it was, but it was all part of it when you're that age and working for free. So, very much so. It was the sort of what opened my eyes to what is possible at that age by being involved and around it.
Well, we've got a great case study of yours, which is now going to be available inside the roadmap, and I've had a sneak peek at it, and it's really incredible. Your stories there, and all of the pictures of before the refurb, and then all of the after pictures, which are incredible, and all of the juicy numbers. So this is a really incredible project, and I'm really excited to talk about this, and I want to quiz you about this a little bit today. But before I do, I want to know a little bit more about the relationship between your HMO portfolio, which you've built over the years, and now your development company, which I know you spend a lot of your time, and I think you said yourself, you spend about 80% of your time or focus on that company. It's interesting because I was recording something just yesterday and talking about an 80-20 principle, and your 80 is very much, by the sounds of it, your development work, and the 20% is the HMOs. But it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, the HMOs is actually has been the vehicle that's driven all of your development projects and the ability to do that. So it'd be great to know a little bit more about that relationship between these two very different, these two very chalk and cheese strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. So very much as you alluded to, the HMOs are the cash cow that allow me to spend 2 or 3 years waiting to get planning and develop out a scheme. So the HMOs have, it's very difficult if you are trying to go straight into development cold with no job, no income, because it takes a really long time to actually make any money from a development, especially if you're running the planning, which we pretty much solely run the planning ourselves, and then and that can take 6-12 months, and then you've got to build it out, which can take another 12-18 months depending on the size of it, and then you've got to have a sales period as well. Yes, some of those can be sold off plan, However, you've still got to factor in at least 6 to 12 month sales period. So you're talking sort of 3 years, realistically, by the time you actually see any cash coming back from these schemes. So you've somehow got to prop yourself up for that period of time. And either you can have a very large capital pot that you're using for your development, but you're also raiding to live off, which is an option. However, I didn't have that, and so I think it's fairly rare people do have that. So I was very lucky that the HMOs were that springboard to allow me to spend that time focusing on the larger stuff, and the time that it takes to actually deliver a scheme. Also, on the other side of it, you've got I wouldn't have got into development without going into HMOs, because you start buying some mid-terrace Victorian properties, doing some light refurbs on them, and this is how I progressed it. And then I went through some heavy refurbs. You started doing extensions, cellar conversions, attic conversions, back to brick, rewire, replumb, and then you start sort of slowly scaling that up, and then you start getting more confident that actually then you can do some flats, some subdivision, and get some flats in there, and then actually go, okay, now you can start cutting your teeth a bit more as you sort of progress up that ladder. And I think fundamentally, I will say there's always, property development is the sort of pinnacle in many respects of the property sort of world, and it's the big profits, but it's also the massive risk that goes with it. It's just, I was really fortunate that I managed to cut my teeth a bit, get that experience, the refurbs, and then I actually to allow me to take that leap into going for the big stuff. As I said, it's massive risk. So I actually worked for a residential developer in London for a few years, just to sort of get some experience on someone else's time, paying me. It was excellent, and I just saw really how a proper large property development company actually operates, and what they're actually looking for with the sites they're buying, actually how they're running the deals and structuring the deals and appraising the deals, and that was invaluable in terms of taking that forward to Marsh's Homes, which I certainly wouldn't have been able to do without it.
And you've got some pretty big sites in Marsh's Home. What sort of sizes are we talking, Miles? These land development projects?
Yeah, so our sweet spot's very much sort of 5 to 30 or 40, really, and in between is what we're really focusing on. So we've got sites that sort of 4 or 5 units. We've got the middle size. We've got one for 10, and then we've got the slightly larger size of that at the moment that we're in planning for 20, and they're all housing sites.
Very, very exciting. So it's really interesting to hear how HMOs has sort of allowed you to do this, and you refer to it as a springboard. And again, you went and got more experience to learn about the land development stuff as well, which is really, really interesting to hear somebody say. Let's talk about this juicy deal then. This case study, whereabouts was it, Miles?
So the case study was in Hereford.
And you bought this for 200,000, didn't you?
Yeah.
And before we hit record, you said you chose this one because it wasn't straightforward. There are some issues with this, which I'm really interested to talk to you about. So just for the benefit of all of our wonderful listeners, you bought this for about 200,000. You spent a huge amount on it. In fact, you spent 140,000 quid. In fact, a little bit more than that. And at the back end, it nets about just under 20,000 a year. So it's a really good project. And how many rooms is this one, Miles?
So 6 bedrooms.
Yeah. 6 bedrooms with 4 en suites. Amazing. And it really is an incredible project. I'm looking at the pictures right now, and it's an amazing project. And so tell us a little bit more about this project, Miles. Where did you find this project? Was it an open market deal, or was it something that you managed to secure off market?
Yeah, so the property came through an agent that actually bought a couple of properties previously through. So he knew he'd bought 2 or 3 through him already, and he just phoned me and said, "This is coming to market. If do you want to have a look around it?" So of course I sort of viewed it as soon as I could, and I offered almost there and then on it.
And what did you do with that refurb? 140,000. That is a big refurb. It's not far off the value, the price that you paid for the house. So it's a huge amount of work that you obviously did, and you must have been incredibly confident with what this could be worth at the back end. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people often get stuck with and get very anxious about, rightly so, because there's a really big amount of money that we're talking about. So how did you know that the valuation was going to stack up where it did, and what was underpinning that decision to do such a big refurbishment?
Okay, so first thing on that is we thought the valuation would be something. It ended up not being something. So
Right.
how
So
we
you
actually
thought it would be, more than that, did you? Or
so we'd had probably 3, if not 4, properties in the same area, i.e. a road over or 2 roads over, because all of our houses in that area of Hereford are in 3 roads. Very straightforward.
Right.
We'd had valuations back on those at the levels we thought they would be. We had the valuation reports, we'd had them actually drawn down by the lender, and we were fairly confident we would get those valuations. This was the point when I think the commercial valuation space was a little bit more just sort of lenient, and we were using Shawbrook. At the time, during this refurb, Shawbrook decided to change their lending criteria, and halfway through, so we'd already bought it, we're already mid-refurb, and they decided that they wouldn't give a full-blown commercial value on it unless it was, in an Article 4 area, or too generous, basically, sort of planning permission. So this was a 6-bed, so we weren't too generous, didn't have planning. It wasn't in an Article 4 area, and so they basically gave us an end value plus a small sort of margin on top of that for being an HMO, but very much not the commercial valuation we'd had previously from them. So that was how we thought we were going to get the end value. As it happens, we didn't.
And on that, Matt, if you'd have known that, that was going to be the case, and it was going to get valued at 350. I mean, I look at the deal, and the return on your capital employed is 21%. Your net yield is 5%. That's after your costs. Gross yield 12%. Netting almost £20,000 a year. On paper, sounds like an incredibly good project to me, and very much in line, if not better than the majority of the projects that we see up here in the prime areas, particularly the student stock. So I'm interested to know that if you'd have known that value was going to be 350 and it was going to look like this, would you still have done the deal, or would it have changed your mind?
Okay, so we did get a 350 value, but it wasn't with the lender. We had to fight for a new lender to give us the value we needed. So we went through a phase of getting down valued. I can't remember what it was that we actually got down valued, but it wasn't 350. We then had to basically say thank you, but no thank you to that lender. And we went back and we started going to our broker and going, who can get us a valuation that we need to make this stack at the levels you've just sort of talked about. So we went through a few options. We spoke to as many valuers as we could who were on the panel, and we started saying, look, how would you value this? If you were to give, these are the rents, we've got it let, these are the rents, this is the amount of money we've spent on it, how are you going to value this? And we finally found somebody who was on a panel with one of the lenders that agreed with us that the value could be at that sort of level. As it happens, it got down value a little bit anyway with the lender, but it was good enough to make it stack at the level. So that's how we spoke to valuers, and we just had to find somebody who would do it.
So it was a bit of a battle, really, to get the value that you needed. Okay, and what did you do on this refurb, Miles? It sounds like you rebuilt the house. 140,000.
We pretty much did rebuild the house, actually. It had First of all, we started, the plan was, cellar conversion, which we'd already done about half a dozen of, so it was fairly straightforward. It wasn't new. And attic conversion, again, already done a load of attic conversions. Nothing major, massive dormer off the side, it wasn't a problem. That was the plan. Reconfigure it internally. There was a very big bathroom, and if you imagine a Victorian property, a lot of the time they have a box room with a small bathroom at the end of at the rear of the house. That had been knocked through and made into a very large bathroom. So we basically turned that into a bedroom. And then we converted the cellar, we rejigged the downstairs to get a bedroom in the front, what was sitting room. We kept the old dining room and kitchen as an open plan kitchen dining room, so communal space. And then we managed to turn the very large front bedroom into a smaller bedroom with a bathroom off it, a communal bathroom off it. Middle bedroom was a stated bedroom, and then the rear bathroom became a bedroom. And then we converted the attic, so we went up into the attic.
Okay, so you did a lot, and you sound clearly very confident in your ability to project manage these sorts of things, Miles, but I appreciate you had quite a bit of experience under your belt by this point. Aside from the valuation, were there other issues with this project? This
is what happens, and I think it's a really good thing to talk about so people actually understand that it doesn't go to plan, and so what happened was initially the cellar collapsed, so we were digging out the cellar and we were taking it down a bit to get the head height. We weren't underpinning, but we were just getting it bit more head height. So that the brickie who was doing it didn't prop up the way it should have been propped up, and the whole thing collapsed. So
hopefully not with him in it.
no, no, I think I don't think so. So we had to basically dig that back out, and then we had to get a ring beam cast with it to support it. So that delayed the project by about 3 months and cost almost double to convert the cellar just to get it sorted and something. Then we went other major problems, structural. We basically started peeling it back to brick, and we basically rebuilt all the internal walls. And when we started peeling it back to brick, we started seeing some major cracks that we hadn't sort of realised. And this is the difficulty: is it's all well and good saying get a structural survey, but on the whole, a lot of the time, structural surveys, it's almost impossible to actually see behind it until you start peeling it off. So yes, if there's anything obvious, they pick them up, but a lot of the time it's not obvious. So we started peeling it back, and we started getting some massive cracks. So the whole house pretty much was strapped. So that had to be dealt with, and that was a cost and a delay. But yeah, a lot of strapping. All of the walls were rebuilt. So in terms of rebuilding it, yeah, a lot of it was rebuilt, and the whole thing was rewired, replumbed, obviously. It was almost built internally from scratch.
Wow, well, it doesn't sound like a project for the faint-hearted. But it sounds like you obviously dealt with it all in the right way. I mean, again, in retrospect, was there anything that you would have done differently in approaching that project, or do you think that it would have been impossible to actually foresee those issues that you actually had without, having ripped it back to brick in the first place?
So the structural side of things, no, I don't think so. As I said, we could have got a structural survey, but quite frankly, I don't think it would have actually picked up what we encountered as we started peeling back the plasterboard. I think we actually subbied this project. So something that's quite important is we were the project managers on it, opposed to getting a main contractor in. If we'd had a main contractor in, we might not have had the cost expense of the seller, because it would have been their responsibility to sort it, and it would have been under that sort of contract that it was sorted. And it's not really our fault if one of their subcontractors let it collapse by not propping it up properly. So, but we didn't. We were running it with ourselves, and we had employed the brickie who was doing it. And when it collapsed, it was just, well, he basically walked off site and said, "I'm not sorting it out," sort of thing, unless you pay me. So that was almost out of our control. So in hindsight, would we got a main contractor? Yes, probably, because it would have reduced the cost, I think, significantly where things had gone wrong. We were trying to project manage it to save some money, which obviously is ironic, because we ended up spending more money on it, because the quotes we had initially were significantly higher than we'd expected. So yes, I probably wouldn't have project managed it, and we would have got a main contractor in to do the works, as they would have been able to sort of sort a lot of these problems out within the budgeted price.
It's interesting, isn't it, how so often we can look for methods to try and save costs and not necessarily cut corners, but by project managing ourselves or using teams we know, and actually ultimately sometimes end up spending more. But hey ho, that is property development, isn't it? It isn't straightforward. And when you're looking at projects like these with big developments, adding dormers and basements and things like that, then there certainly is a degree of risk that all of these projects carry. And I think that it's really important that everybody does recognise and acknowledge that while we can plan as best as possible, and we can have our numbers on the spreadsheet, and we can get builders' quotes and things like that, there's always an element of risk involved with developing property. Stuff that we just can't see, stuff that can just go wrong. And so we always need a contingency in place for that sort of thing as well. So this is a 6-bed professional let, Miles, and I assume now up and running, no problems. And
yeah, it's been up and running for about three years or sort of in around there.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's great.
And what sort of occupancy do you get on your professional lets? Because your portfolio is predominantly professional let over students, isn't it?
It's 100% professional lets.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Prior to COVID, we were running very comfortably at about 96% sort of occupancy. Hereford is a fairly small place, and as you said at the start, it is easier sometimes in these larger cities where people actually want to be. However, we have found a very small niche market there, and it's worked. Mm-hmm. So the quality has helped. We've had to fight quite hard over the last couple of years to stay at that sort of level. The agency spends a lot of money on pay-per-click ads. We spend a lot of money on Facebook and Instagram ads, a lot of money on SEO, a lot of money on, we've just licensed some software that keeps us at the top of spare room permanently, sort of thing. So we've had to innovate quite a lot. We've had to spend money. We've had to go back and virtually tour all of the properties. We've had to re-photograph all of the properties professionally, just to stay ahead. So it's been quite hard to stay at that level, but that's roughly where we are running. Obviously, COVID had an impact on that, and that dipped. I reckon we're about 80%. But we're back up to 100% now. So we're fully let in every single one of our rooms and
fantastic, fantastic. So it all sounds very exciting, Miles. You've got a good HMO portfolio, you've got the agency running them, you've got staff, you've got your development business, which is working on some really big projects, and I know you've done some great stuff already. But what about the stuff that isn't quite as exciting? The running of the agency and the managing staff and the stuff that, the challenges perhaps that COVID brought. Looking back, the last few years on your business, are there any parts of what you do or have done that really stand out as being very challenging and difficult that you'd like to share with our listeners?
So I personally am not an overly good manager. I find it quite dull, quite frankly, sort of thing, having to put agendas together and meeting notes and performance reviews and things. But it's something I've had to do, so I've had to sort of really try and work out how best to do that. So that has been tricky, but it's relatively straightforward to sort of implement that. So I've had to sort of do that. Again, on the finance side of things, I really don't particularly enjoy numbers, but I've had to obviously really spend a lot of time looking at P&Ls, looking at Zero, all of the end of year accounts, and just getting my head around all of that. So those are two things that I've had to really sort of get quite good at. And that's what comes with running a company. But yeah, in terms of managing staff, I try and spend my time now. I still am doing a lot of the managing and things, but just trying to build a bit of a culture within the company, and ensure that it's just a good place to work, really, that we want to retain our staff, and we actually look after them and we care about them, and that they want to be there.
What does your typical working day look like, Miles? Do you go into the office? Are you, how much time do you need to spend dealing with the agency, and what are you doing with the development business? What does it typically look like?
Yeah, so I've gone through phases of how I structure this. Sometimes I go, right, on a Monday I'm going to do just the agency. On a Tuesday I'm just going to do development. On a Wednesday it's just HMOs. That was a good idea in principle. As it happened, it didn't really stick, because things just pop up that just need dealing with, and you get a phone call, you get an email, and you just switch. So in terms of a typical day, I flip between London here, where I am now, and the office in Hereford. So I go up when needed. I was up there last week onboarding a new property manager, so I was up there for that, and I tend to go up probably once a fortnight, probably on average. But we typically Zoom. We'll have check-in meetings on a Monday or a Friday on Zoom, and obviously all the comms in between. But a typical day, so I slightly comes down to what's on at the moment, and I try and spend the morning really focusing on the bigger picture stuff, and just sort of looking at what do I actually need to get done that's going to push this forward. If I could just do one thing, it's that classic. If I put it really does work sort of thing. If I could just do one thing today that actually pushed this company forward, be it the agency or the development company or whatever. Like yesterday, for example, we've got a tender in for another 10-house site in Hereford that we want to bid on. So that was getting the offer together for that, reviewing the numbers, and just getting that in, because I know that if we put that in and we got it, then that pushes that company forward. So I tend to try and focus on what something would actually push the company forward, and then all the money that comes with it can be done in the afternoon. But yeah, I'm not overly good. I do flip really quickly between things, and 1 minute I'm doing emails for that company, the next minute I'm doing emails for this company, and I just think that's the reality of it when you're running several different companies, and involved in them, sort of thing. So it is quite difficult to focus fully on one or other.
I can certainly relate to that, Miles, and with all the will in the world, trying to do certain things on certain days and protect your time from certain things, it often just doesn't work like that when you've got staff and when you've got tenants and when things go wrong or circumstances change slightly. So I think as a business owner, particularly in property, run multiple businesses, you've got to be prepared to turn your hand to anything very, very quickly. But I think if you can, as you have done, make sure that you're working on the business and not just in the business. That's absolutely key. And I think it's so difficult and so easy at the same time to get sucked in, get dragged into doing the detail, managing the tenant issues, managing the minor issues with the properties, non-urgent stuff that really absorbs a huge amount of your time and a huge amount of your headspace. And before you know it, you haven't spent any time actually looking or assessing deals or planning the next staff recruitment or developing a process to actually improve the performance of the business. And that for me is the key difference between actually kind of having a job essentially and that job may be running and managing properties, or actually having a business and running businesses. So it's great to hear you talk about that and actually placing that order of priority on that sort of responsibility and tasking in your business as well. Miles, if you could give one piece of advice to our listeners, perhaps our listeners who are trying to emulate what you've done, so build a HMO portfolio and then maybe move on ultimately to do some development, and then maybe they're at the very early stages, maybe you haven't got quite started yet, or in the early stages and got one or two HMOs. What advice would you give them at this stage to help them along the way to building a HMO portfolio, and then beyond that, maybe building a portfolio or a business that is developing houses or commercial properties?
Gosh, I got lots of advice, but I think for me, what helped me was seeking out people I could work for or with that I could learn off the back of. It was a really reduced risk. They were even if it's either for free, like I did in Oxford when I was at uni, or when I was in London working as a developer, I was paid. But I think going in, working for somebody else who's that stage ahead, and just seeing how it's done, getting the exposure that you might need to make that jump up, I think is valuable. It worked for me. So if I could give one piece, it would be seek out people who are ahead of you, and offer to work for them, or ideally get a job with them, and do it for a few years before jumping straight in. There's no way I would have ever gone from HMOs straight into building 20 houses like we're doing at the moment. It just wouldn't have happened. Maybe because I probably wasn't open to the idea about it. It's a massive, it seems huge. But then when I went to work with this developer in London, it didn't seem that big because I started understanding how it was done, and you start getting the mechanisms of doing it and how you would structure it, and it all doesn't seem that unrealistic, and you're confident that you've seen it done and been involved in it previously, which isn't a risk, because it's someone else's company that you can take back to your company. So that's what I would suggest. If someone's looking to get into HMOs, definitely go and work with someone who's doing lots of HMOs, and more involved in the refurb side of things. If someone's getting development, again, go and work for a developer or someone like that who can give you exposure to it.
I think that is absolutely superb advice, Miles. So thank you so much for sharing that. Miles, if people want to come and find out a little bit more, maybe reach out, is there a way to contact you, and is there a way to even potentially work with you?
Yeah, of course. So as I've just got onto Instagram, the best place to find me is on Instagram, which is milespa.property, and that's covering everything from all the companies. So that's probably the best place to find me on there, or drop me an email. Best email address for me is miles, which is miles, at marcheshomes.co.uk, and I'll reply to any emails.
Miles, thank you so much for coming on to the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, to listen to you talk about your story, to hear you share your experience, good and bad, about developing HMOs and building property businesses. So big thank you from me to you for coming and joining us today.
Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure.